Hey everybody, welcome to the Growing with Fishes podcast. I'm Steve and
I'm Marty.
welcome and thanks for joining us. We're going to do this podcast to help spread aquaponic growing knowledge and just cannabis growing knowledge in general. Over different topics, what we're growing. Marty and I both have a bunch of different projects going on that'll be really cool for showing you guys over the next couple of months. We both have a lot of experience growing in aquaponics, and we have a lot of cool things to show you guys and talk about. So, we'll get started. Marty, do you want to tell us about yourself?
Sure, yeah. My name is Marty, and I've been growing aquaponics for probably about 4 years now. Started out with just making sort of like a little recycled system out of some storage totes that I had. I think I originally saw maybe a YouTube video, or I can't remember where I originally picked it up, and just got fascinated with it, I guess. And so I built that, grew some basic stuff, some lettuce, some greens, some green onions, stuff like that, and progressed forward and built siphons. And once I was able to grow some nice big tomatoes, as the cliche goes, I decided that it was time to try and do some cannabis. And despite everybody telling me it wouldn't work, it turned out really well, and been really happy with it. And done 3 runs in aquaponics now, working on my 4th, and everything's been really great with it. Obviously, it's a learning experience anytime you grow cannabis, but really you deal with all the same issues plus some fish issues. Other than that, it's really about the same. So that's kind of how I progressed forward into aquaponics, and now I grow my medicine and my food in the same system at the same time. And it's really a great way to lower the nitrogen in your system during flowering, and then be able to eat the result of that. So everything from lettuce and spinach to green onions to kale to Swiss chard, all kinds of different things that you can grow without really affecting your cannabis in a negative way, and actually affecting it in a positive way, has definitely been a big thing for me. And I try not to do any supplements either. That's one of the differences that you'll notice between Steve and I's grows, is that pretty much the only thing that I add is homemade worm tea, and that's really it. It's all made from fruit. In the worm bin, that's all the worms eat. I don't put any greens or vegetables in there that would produce more nitrogen to add back into the system. And about once every 3 to 4 days, I put some water through the worm bin, take what's leached through the worm bin, and pour it right into the beds. And that's pretty much all I do. And it's worked out really well for me. So that's kind of some of my basic growing methods and how I got into them and where we're at now.
Is there anything you don't put in your worm bin or anything like that, like avocados or anything else? What else don't you put in? Citrus or anything? Or
I used to put citrus, and now that I've been working with labs, that I've been activating my worm bin with labs, I haven't had an issue with it at all. Actually, now orange peels or half rotten oranges or any of that stuff really has no problem. Mycelium grows right over the top of it, whereas before it would take a lot longer for that stuff to break down, and usually avoided it. But now I compost that stuff as well, and haven't really noticed a difference, negative or positive, other than I get to utilize more stuff that I didn't utilize before.
Sure. So not everybody knows what labs are. Do you want to explain that a little bit?
I can explain a little bit.
Or whatever.
Yeah. So lactobacillus serum is basically I'm sure there's 5 different ways to pronounce it, and I'm sure I'll get slaughtered for slaughtering it, but basically what it is taking milk and allowing it to ferment in growing a layer of bacteria between what would normally be the cheese layer. As it curdles, there's sort of this thin layer of oil-like substance that develops between the water down below when milk separates, just like any jug of milk does anywhere. And that layer in between is really what you want. So you separate that stuff out. There's a whole process that you go through in order to do it, but basically that aggressive form of beneficial bacteria added into your worm bin is extremely beneficial to break stuff down and provide nutrients in the same way that that we get nitrogen. It just allows you to break down stuff much faster, more efficiently. And I've really noticed a huge difference. I actually get tons of seed sprouts in my bin now. I get, you know, the, like I said, citrus stuff gets broken down no problem. And we've used it in this last year in our outdoor soil garden as well. That's pretty much how we inoculated all of our beds, about once a week with a good lab tea, and then fed raw nutrients. So we'll be keeping our soil alive and continuing that on. And I'm sure you've read about in the the PFA group and all that stuff about recycling our soil. People have been doing it up to 10 times now.
Yeah.
And it getting better instead of worse. And so that's really kind of the same idea I had with the worm bin, was that, you know, it's a great way to put it in the aquaponics system, not necessarily in the loop, but in the worm bin to help that stuff break down faster. And I definitely noticed that I can put more stuff into there and have it get broken down faster. So theoretically, it should be getting more stuff to the plants in each one also.
Sure. Very cool.
So I'd highly recommend, maybe we can put up some links or something after this,
Yeah.
in terms of where to go and how to make a basic lab mix.
Yeah, if you have a good link, we can definitely put that in the description. Make sure people have a good link for that.
Yeah, because it's definitely a lot more advanced than I just hacked it out, but
Yeah.
that's the rough idea of it, and it's extremely beneficial. There's a ton of science behind it. I think I sent you one article that goes really in depth on it, and so for all of you science nerds out there, it's a great article, and I'll get that link over and we'll get it posted.
Yeah, I know there's one good link. I think it's called Microbe Organics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, microbeorganics.com is a good one for learning about worm tea and compost tea. And then for the labs, I think you have a different one, a little more specific.
Right, and then the other article that I posted in the aquaponics group the other day is really good too, from the Reed Institute. You know, like you pointed out, it echoes a lot of the stuff that that a lot of growers have been saying for a long time. A lot of aquaponic growers have been saying for a long time, but it was nice to see it come out in such an organized and professional research paper. It was really great read. Really enjoyed that.
Very cool. And thanks for bringing up the Facebook. For those of you who don't know, we actually have a aquaponic cannabis growing Facebook where we run, and it's just all about mostly aquaponic cannabis growing. Once in a while I'll post some fun cannabis related stuff on there too. It's funny and things. I think Marty had something I reposted earlier. It was about spider mites, and that's why aliens haven't come back yet. So.
That's right, we're in quarantine.
Yeah, we're under spider mite quarantine until they get rid of all the spider mites. So they don't want to screw up their space weed.
So. It's a valid theory, I think.
Right.
I wouldn't come back.
All right, so I'm Steve. I've been working in the cannabis industry now in one way or another for, I guess, 6.5 years now, as long as I've been in Colorado. And before that, had some experience in various places, growing as well. I originally started off in the pet trade. I did pretty much since the age of 12 or 13, worked in a pet shop doing high-end freshwater, saltwater, brackish water, you name it. Then got really into terrariums and orchids, and actually that's when I got into aquaponics and growing things on a more hardcore scale, and growing a lot of really exotic plants. And then managed a green nursery for a while, and then got an opportunity to come out to Colorado and grow for someone out here back when the laws were a little bit different on that stuff, and was growing that way for a while. And then when they changed up the way that they get the supply here for the dispensaries, I had to switch jobs and I've been working for the pet industry for a month or two again before working for a grow out here and not far, just outside of Boulder County. And then started working for the aquaponics source and ended up heading up most of their R&D and their whole cannabis development and all their nutrient lab and all that stuff, and got a chance to do a lot of hardcore nutrient testing, specifically involving flowering plants and cannabis and a bunch of other cool stuff between the 3 different sites that I was running with them, as well as helping out at a co-op, being able to get some aquaponic nutrient data from them as well. So using all that, I've been able to learn a lot about the exact nutrient ranges and stuff that you're looking for, and just trying to bring a lot of the aquaponic stuff more to the bring a lot more data to the table, and make it closer to at least some of the data that's available for hydro or soil, because it's one of the reasons why a lot of people are intimidated. They don't really know what they're kind of aiming for, depending on what you're doing, and depending on what method. A lot of people just like going with the teas and stuff like you have, and it works really well, and then you have it have it dialed in, and then I try to handle it a little bit differently using mineral salts and other organic stuff that is fish safe, and along with brewing tea and things like that. So and that's where I'm at. I'm currently just started my own business called Potent Ponics, and I'll be down in Jamaica in hopefully leaving in next weekend to start off a project to build 2 farms down there. We have some government contracts, which will be really fun to show you guys once it's all done. But everything looks like it's gonna. We have our initial licensing for Canada, export to Canada from Jamaica. So when all said and done, so it'll be all good. But yeah, so not next episode, but the episode after that, depending on when we can shoot the next one, I'll be in Jamaica, so it'll be a good time.
And so, when did you start getting involved with dual road zone? Because obviously, that's one thing that I've looked at it. And I actually have a buddy that has here in Ashland, just south of me, that has grown like a tomato plant that's given him like 1,000 tomatoes off of it. It's been like, extremely fruitful, pardon the pun. But yeah, it's been great. So why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So I originally learned from a gentleman who we'll talk about a little bit later, who owns a company called Atria Gardens, and he's been working for a long time with this method over in Serbia, and then when he came back to the U.S., called dual root zone planting, where you have the bottom half of your plant, you have a pot that you put your plants in. The bottom half is hydrogen. You use a layer of burlap or other root permeable material, and then put your soil on top, and then put it down just far enough into your grow media or flood and drain tray to where the water doesn't touch the soil, so that you're not getting water waking up. And then what happens is your bottom half of your root zone gets a nice flood and drain layer where it can breathe and get real good gas exchange. And then the top half, you can get a whole nice soil layer where you can have all those terrestrial soil microbes or mycorrhizae. A lot of that stuff doesn't like to grow as well or at all in an aquatic environment, or it will grow very differently. And giving it the exact environment that it wants and allowing it to have a layer that you can continually feed or boost, not have to worry about introducing anything to the fish. You could make super concentrated worm tea or other things like that, and not have to worry about having it adjust your pH or having any negative impact on too much nitrogen or whoever your particular formula is that you're using. But if you are well worried about it, it's just a way of dosing your plants in an aquaponic system without having to worry about it much at all. And the way that you do that is, once you have your soil in your pot, you want to take a measuring cup, and you're going to pour water in there and measure how much water you put in there. So for example, if I put 64 ounces in there of water into that soil layer, and then it starts to drip out the bottom over the course of about 5-10 minutes, be realistic about it. And then I know I can put at least 32 ounces of water in there from now on, without oversaturating it, as long as I give it at least a week in the beginning to dry back out. But once that plant's cranking, they'll suck that thing dry 3 times a week, that soil layer. But that soil layer is where, you know, you can really do a lot of tinkering, and, you know, you can have a really rich soil mix and do almost like if you do bigger containers, you can even do a no type system in a aquaponic setup. No problem at all, which I know that's a way a lot of people are moving towards, is maintaining those mycorrhizae networks and all that stuff. So, which I believe is kind of what you were touching on a little bit earlier.
Right, and so, you know, it's really not that much different than having my worm bin set up and having it in there. Ultimately, you know, it's just that I'm diluting it a lot more when I add it in, essentially, is what it comes down to, and makes it so that I don't have to feed each plant individually, but it also makes it so that you can feed each plant individually with the dual zone. So it's just a matter of, you know, delivery system at that point. And where you know, obviously, if you're, like you're saying, if you want a large number of plants, then, you know, you're probably going to have to go a route where you can add, you know, more supplements at one time, as opposed to so diluted and over time.
And, you know, you can always hook it up to a regular ring sprayer and put it on a timer and have it to where you can get it, you know, watered similar to a traditional soil plant for that soil layer without having too much of an issue. As long as you use the quicker timers.
Right. So in my garage, I actually have 2 different systems set up right now in 2 different fish tanks. One has catfish in it, and the other one still has the koi and goldfish. And so in the catfish tank, I actually have the worm bin situated right over the top of it, and a separate small aquarium pump on a timer, so that like 5 minutes, it pumps water up into there and lets it drain back through right back down into the tank. So I'm experimenting with just automating that process, and it's working really well. I also was able to, I think you saw the post I did where I compared the one that had worm tea in it and the one that didn't in it. And so I left that one. I wanted to see how long before I didn't get anything in flower, so it hadn't had any worm tea at all. And at about 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks in the flower, is really started to yellow up, and that's when I took that original picture. And you could really see the difference, because the grow beds are right next to each other under the same light. Everything else is really the same, and so that was really the only difference. And then, you know, once it got really yellow, took the picture, added worm tea in. I think it's been maybe 3 days now, and it's already really starting to green back up. So it was a nice little experiment to see, like, that's really going to be about, you know, the max you're going to be able to go without some sort of worm tea or additional supplement that you're going to be able to get to. And I think that's one of the walls that people hit previously, and probably some of the negativity that we received around it was just people that hit that wall and didn't take that next step and say, okay, well, it turns yellow after 3 weeks. Now, while I pour in some worm tea, you know, I just think it's a natural progression. And it was neat to be able to have those 2 systems right next to each other, and to be able to say, you know, this one got worm tea, that one didn't. That's really the only difference between the 2, and show what it can do. And so it's almost all the way green back up now after about 3 days. And I expect between 5 to 7 days, they'll pretty much look identical again. So it's kind of a neat little project.
Yeah, it's cool that you posted all that and were able to do the side by side like that.
Yeah, I like having my own experiments. I think that it's always good to learn hands-on. And, and then be able to test it and say, you know, I'm pretty sure this is what's going to happen. I know this system here is going to turn, you know, going to have nutrient issues of some kind, right? Obviously, I didn't know what was going to show first, but, you know, that iron deficiency, you know, popped out pretty quick, which doesn't surprise me at all. But it does give a pretty good indication, I think, that adding that worm tea in obviously is making a huge difference. And I did have a couple of people private message me that was saying it was basically a waste of time. So that was probably the main reason why I said, okay, well, let's test that theory out. You know what I mean?
Right.
And obviously I get private messages from a lot of people that say a lot of different things, but they were suggesting that everything was coming from the aquaponics system, and that I didn't need to do the worm tea at all, and it was a waste of time. If I didn't put molasses in it and like do all this other special stuff to it, it wasn't wasn't going to have the same effect. And I disagree. I think that I don't even aerate my tea anymore. I just allow it to aerate in the system. I poured it directly in the tank as opposed to pouring it in the beds. I've tried a number of different ways of adding to the system, and pretty much as long as it gets in there, it's just fine. I haven't noticed a big difference between adding it to beds versus adding it to tanks versus diluting it more, diluting it less. You know, pretty much it's all about that. You know, it's all about volume, how much you put in.
Do you pH adjust your tea at all?
pH test my what?
pH adjust your tea?
Tea, no. I use aquaponic water, so I use water right from the tank that's already, you know, it's already.
Oh, okay.
So that way I'm also, you know, feeding some of that, the solids that come through right into the worm bin and pulling them out of the system. I don't get too many anymore because I have like double filtering beds. So these beds filter out first that flow into the next two, and then those two beds filter out before it goes back to the fish tank. So most of my solids are filtered out by that anyway, but anything that I do pump out is just going to feed the worms even more. And then I don't have to pH the water that I put in because it's already done from the tank. It just goes right back into the system. Yeah. And so yeah, that works pretty well for me.
So you just pour water through your worm bin then? Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
Huh, that's different.
Yeah, it is. And I used to do all that other stuff. I used to like aerate it overnight. I even tried adding molasses to a couple of mixes to see if there was any, I felt like there was any major difference in that. And it just seems like more work, to be honest. I haven't noticed a big drop, and I haven't done it at all on this run. So I guess, you know, the proof is always in the pudding. We'll see. We're only about three and a half weeks or so in, but it's looking pretty good so far.
Have you ever taken some of the runoff and like looked at it under a microscope versus what you were doing before?
Yeah, I did it before and after I added labs to the mix, just because I was relatively interested, and I by no means know what I'm looking at, but I do know that you know, there's definitely an increased amount of microbial life and a diversity that wasn't there before. Different types of things moving around is really about the only observation that I can make as a non-scientist. But that's I definitely noticed a huge difference, not only in the volume of what was there, but also the diversity of what was there. So I'm definitely a big proponent of those. I've seen them, like, you know, this for instance was pretty much fed entirely with labs. This is from that outdoor soil grow that I was talking about. This is Hercule, which is a 1.5 to 1 cut of Hercule right here. So this tested at like 14.9 CBD and 9.5 THC, and
nice.
It's a great smoke. So I've definitely seen enough about labs to be convinced that they're highly beneficial.
What? Very cool.
What do you have next on the list there?
So you and I both grow aquaponics, and there's not a ton of, well, it's kind of a newer part of the growing community that hasn't been around quite as long. So I did a bit of research, and the oldest I could find any mention of like decent, successful aquaponic cannabis was from this old article from 1994 on
injecting that into the roots.
No, what they were doing is they were doing the plants in hydrogen pots, and they had them in flood and drain tables, and then they were top dressing with the fish waste from their filters. And it was some guy posting basically in the back room of a fish store.
Did you one guy though? I don't know when it was from. It was definitely a while ago, based on the footage though. But there was a guy that did it. I think it was like for a college course of some kind. It was like a study or something. And anyway, he figured out how to basically was using a needle to inject nutrients.
Yeah, I remember that.
Did you read that one?
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know really that much about it, but it was if I remember right, in my head, at least, it was the oldest one that I could find, or what I thought was the oldest one that I could find also. Other than that, it was just a lot of discouragement about not doing it, you know, and I'm sure, which is all valid based on, you know, stuff that they had done. It's just there are ways to solve problems. That's all.
Yeah, well, that and a lot of people too, they'll run their nitrogen way too high through flower. You know, a lot of people that run aquaponics are running their nitrogen, you know, 80, 160 parts per million, you know, way higher than they really should be. And that really does cause a lot of problems, especially in flower. Even if you have everything else dialed in, it's going to make your stuff fluffy. So.
Right. Well, it's going to slow it down too. You know, you know, you might be expecting the harvest in 8 weeks, but it might be closer to 16 weeks. If you have high nitrogen, it's going to slow the flowering process down. So even if you wanted them to harden up or you fix the issue, you're still going to be running a lot longer than you want to be. I had I think it was heavyweight fruit punch, I think it was, in my second run that just took forever to finish up because of that exact same reason, until I added in a whole entire cover crop of microgreens and really absorbed all the nutrients out of that one bin. Did it ever really finish up? And it was way more sensitive than the other strains I had in that run. I had Oregon Skunk, Fruit Punch, and I can't remember now. Oh, Lemon OG. And OGs are almost always really picky about it. So I'm not sure why it ended up affecting that one bed more than other ones. But even in that system, I only had 6 fish. So that's only like, you know, one fish per plant. So that's a really good example of how little nitrogen you need during the flower cycle, and how you know, if you're really stacking, like you have tilapia or something like that, or catfish even, that you know, are definitely going to be producing a lot more waste. I think that it's definitely easy for it to get away, because when you're raising fish that you want to eat, you're going to want to up the stocking levels. So it just gets out of hand really quickly if you're not consuming it. And so that's why I switched over to doing so much microgreens and lettuce and different stuff along with mine at the same time. And since then, I haven't really had an issue. So, you know, I'm a really big proponent of, like, I know we've talked about this before, but when you buy green onions at the store, they still have roots left on them. You can cut off the top and replant them and grow them back. And they're a great way to identify issues in your system just by being able to gauge how fast they're growing or how healthy they are, by having smaller other plants in the system that you can read in addition to your own cannabis plants that are going to take longer to show changes. I feel like it's a great way to consume nitrogen and give you other plants to read that give you an idea of your overall health of your system.
Using bait plants, I'm a huge fan of using sugar snap peas and kale shoots are good. Chamomile is another great one. You know, your mites, your all your nasties, your thrips, all those guys, they love to go, you know, they'll much prefer a real sweet sugar snap pea or, you know, something like that. And then, you know, I'm going to instantly see, because those leaves show damage a little bit easier sometimes than cannabis, especially spider mite damage.
Right.
It's easier to tell, oh, hey, in this corner of the room, they're starting to come in the greenhouse, or, you know, this, that, or the other. Oh, crap, I got them in there. But at least you got something that's more tasty to them. Cannabis has a lot of things in it that insects makes it harder for them to digest. So if you give them something else, like another bait plant, it really helps with that. And then I know if you're growing on a bigger scale, especially if you're down in California or in the South, or you know, somewhere in the tropics, a lot of people are starting to plant or do plant neem trees on the barrier of their grow as well, or other, you know, citronella. There's plenty of other insect repellent plants that you can plant as a barrier around your garden, or even intermixed with your garden to help, again, discourage.
Right, or encourage them to go to a certain place where you can treat them. I found that, like, peppermint, for instance, is great for that too. It's a great bait plant because, like, whiteflies and aphids and all kinds of different bugs are attracted to that way more than anything else. So as soon as they get in there, it gives you a place to identify them and treat them right there. You know, if you treat them there, then you're going to take out most of them. And I use ladybugs and predator mites as long as my humidity is at a realistic level to keep them around. I'm a big proponent of those, and they work fantastic. And then as far as microgreens go, I really enjoy the pea greens like you were talking about. The whole family loves to eat them. They grow extremely fast. The seeds are easy to sprout. So that's definitely, you just got to make sure they don't get out of control and start climbing your plants, because that definitely can be an issue. Although I thought about doing some low stress training with pea plants. I thought that might be an interesting avenue to go about how it work out, but I think it'd be interesting one way or another. But I do love those. And I think the regeneration is an important part. It's great for being able to eat them and not have to plant them as often and that kind of stuff. But I do use, if I have a particular bed I want to give a boost to, I use buckwheat because it doesn't regenerate. So as soon as you cut it, all those roots then become food for the worms that are in the bed and provide that extra boost that to do that. But also be careful doing that in nitrogen, or I'm sorry, doing that in flour, because it will boost nitrogen when you do that also. Those roots, when they start eating them, your nitrogen levels are gonna go up. So I try to use buckwheat in the beginning when I'm in veg, and then I use primarily pea greens when I'm in flour, so that way I can replant them as often as I need to, but for the most part, they're gonna regen and we're gonna continue to eat them. And we won't have dead roots in the bed that will then contribute to the nitrogen issue.
Have you ever tried using buckwheat for seed sprout tea as well, or?
Yeah, I've used buckwheat. I've also used corn is actually a great option for when you're in flour.
Yeah, I've used corn.
And it's really easy to do. We've used barley before. And really pretty much any seed that you can get in bulk, it's going to sprout in a jar of water. I mean, that gives you quite a few options. We try to avoid like the barley and stuff, again, when you're in flour, because that's going to be mostly nitrogen. But the corn is great because it gives you such a rounded amount of nutrients. You do get nitrogen also, but not nearly as much as like a barley or a, I can't even think of the other one we used right now. But
This makes good chicken feed when it's done sprouting.
Yeah, sprouted chicken feed. That's right.
I'm a huge fan of mint as a pest or an attractant plant too, just because it grows so easy. You just rip a chunk off and stick it in the grow bed anywhere you want, and it'll just root on its own. The other one that I like that works really well like that is watercress. Watercress, if it's near moisture, it'll keep growing. You can't kill this stuff. It's almost like mint.
Yeah,
also great on sandwiches.
I've had it like completely take over beds, just like left unchecked. What I do have mint in my beds right now, but I actually pull up and prune all the different roots that come out the side, so that it allows it to spread. So I'll just pull it right up out of the bed and sort of prune the roots, and so that way it doesn't take over everything. Otherwise, it'll be everywhere in no time. I had a NFT system outside a couple of years ago. I think there's a video on my YouTube about it still, but anyway, it was in that NFT system, and it was literally, when I pulled that thing out at the end of the year, I think the roots were something like 6 feet one direction and 5 feet in the other direction, and it had it was growing inside the pipe. Like when you pull out the net pots, you would see like peppermint like growing inside, and started like shooting up through other holes in the NFT system. It just went crazy. So that's when I realized that in order to keep it from spreading like that, if you pull it up out, you can see I don't know what kind of roots they are, but they're a thicker, hardier root that it starts growing out to the side and spreading out in that way. So I clip all those and prune them back, and it's much more easier to manage that way.
Yeah, so what actually happens, so those thicker, fatter roots or tap roots, the plants produce 3 different types of root structures, and that's actually a really good point. So what you can do is when you're trimming those, what happens is most of the plant's root inhibitor hormone is produced in the tips of those tap roots. So when you trim them off, suddenly the plant doesn't have that inhibitor to slow it down and force it to go straight down and seek iron and water. You're going to provide it with iron and water. It doesn't need to like reach as deep as it can get and try and find, just find a source of water, because you're going to take care of it. When you're transferring clones or seedlings, when you pull them out, when you're transplanting, if you can find the 1 to 4 or 5 biggest tap roots and you trim just the very tips of them, you can get rid of that inhibitor. And you'll notice, if you do a side-by-side comparison, about a 20 to 30% additional leaf count increase after about the first week, and about a 30-ish% after the second week. I've done side-by-sides on that, and back where I used to work at, both with tomatoes and with cannabis clones, and worked really, really well for that. But yeah, that's exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, I've read a lot about the root pruning on clones, and how it allows to get more of those feeder roots coming out, as opposed to just the tap root extending out to looking for wherever it needs to go. And oftentimes in a cloning setup, it could be looking for a long time before it finds what it actually wants. So by trimming that off, you can get essentially more feeder roots faster, which leads to more foliage. So that's all makes sense.
So is there any plants that you think are definitely like a do not put them in an aquaponic system? The only one that comes to mind that I can think of is I would highly recommend against bringing in strawberries. Almost every single greenhouse strawberry has spider mites on it, that I've seen for the last 4 or 5 years. And they also suck up iron really heavily compared to other similar sized plants. So that's definitely one I would recommend against putting in as a companion plant. Is there any others that you have?
Basically, I stay away from anything that fruits or flowers. I mean, I have a separate system that I grow, like cucumbers, tomatoes, like all of that stuff. If it goes in with the cannabis, and then it's pretty much greens, and that's it. We try to stick with anything with that. I did grow some blueberries and some grapes in with my system last year in the outdoor, and it didn't necessarily seem to make a huge difference, but it was 2 small plants that I actually had growing out of my filter, which was kind of funny. I have just like a swirl filter. So I put a top on it, on the swirl filter, and basically they grew in there just like a DWC, no media at all. And it actually turned out really great. I didn't touch them or do anything with them, and the grapes were delicious. The blueberries were pink lemonade blueberries, and they were really good too. Yeah, and I read a lot of stuff on blueberries that said that they wouldn't flower, unless you had extremely acidic water. So I was slightly concerned about that, but I didn't have an issue. I mean, I'm sure you would get larger yields from more acidic water, but it still produced plenty for us to eat as a small family and get some enjoyment out of it and worth it. But as of right now, I don't have any, like even bell peppers, tomatoes, all that stuff goes in a separate system. But like romaine lettuce, various herbs like sage, thyme, any of those things are all going to do well. And as far as anything that fruits or flowers, I would put in a separate system,
Sure.
Not with cannabis. But in terms of stuff that doesn't grow well, specifically in aquaponics, I don't think I've really ran into anything that I would say, don't put it in there. Like you mentioned, strawberries, obviously, there's a ton of issues around that. They're remarkable resistant to spider mites, which I think is rather.
Oh yeah, they can be horribly infested and just throw berries off and not even care.
Yeah, whoever's doing the genetic modification needs to cross some strawberries with some cannabis, and we can be done with all that shit. But it amazes me how they can live on strawberry plants and not really affect the plant at all. So obviously, anything you bring into your room, strawberries, anything, whatever it is, quarantine it wherever you get it from. I don't care if you get it from Lowe's or you get it from your buddy who's a super awesome gardener and whatever else. Like, if you want to avoid the same situation that every other grower has ran into, just set up a quarantine and spend about 3 to 5 days making sure that everything's really clean. Spray them down with your essential oil mixes and all that kind of stuff, whether it's clones or starts or whatever it is. And for the most part nowadays, I pretty much just throw seeds in and wait for them to sprout. I don't get that many starts. I don't mess with any of that stuff, because anything that you transplant out of soil, is going to be traumatized. Just it's not the same way. You can go from aquaponics to soil, not traumatize the plant, but you're not going to wash the dirt off of every inch of its root system and tear it apart and throw it in the system. It'll live and survive, but not without being traumatized in some way and slowed down. So I highly recommend seeds. If you can, you can tolerate sexing your plants, even for cannabis, I would recommend seeds. For sure, you just get more vigorous growth out of them. They're more symmetrical, all that different stuff. Plus, you get to hunt phenotypes, which everybody knows how much fun that is. So, yeah, I think especially for all my greens and different things, even tomatoes and bell peppers, I've just taken to saving seeds from ones I buy at the farmer's market, ones I specifically like, and sprouting those. It doesn't take much to dry out the seeds and throw them in. And I actually composted a couple of tomatoes, like small cherry tomatoes that had been rotten in the freezer or something like that. I can't remember where they were. But I threw them in the compost bin, and now I have probably 30 little seedlings popping up out of the compost bin. And I found that after adding labs to it, I probably get at least 60% more of that. I mean, I used to get, seed sprouts in there periodically, but, nearly every seed from a tiny little tomato ended up sprouting in there. So that was kind of cool to have that little test on it too. But that's another way that you can get your own seeds without having to really mess with transplanting anything or getting any bugs from anywhere else. And so I do have strawberries in my other system, and they do have spider mites on them. So at least they used to. I've treated them a number of times now, so I hope they don't. But I bet if I looked real hard, I could find one. And that's on a totally separate area. Try to keep that as down as I could. So try not to go from one to the other without washing my hands or any of that normal stuff you do in a grow room. But I do far less than anybody else does. My garage is used just like a normal garage. It's not sealed off in any way. My AC doesn't have anything other than a basic filter on it. I have good airflow. I spray 3 times a day or every 3 days with the spray that we talked about with essential oils, garlic, oregano, rosemary, peppermint, thyme. Basically kind of whatever. Lemongrass is probably, I think you mentioned kapow before, and so I pretty much stick with that same sort of percentage that kapow does, but I rotate the oils and mixes. So, depending on what I have available, peppermint's really easy to grow. I've even done lavender oil. I don't know if you've worked with that before, but I've had good success with all of them. And then I just rotate them, so I'm not always doing the same one. And in between there, I release, especially right when flower starts, I release ladybugs and predator mites, because obviously you stop spraying oils once you get heavy into flower, or else it's just going to get absorbed into your bud, and then your extractor is going to yell at you because extracted 2 ounces of neem oil out of your plants. Yeah, this is a shitload of his time. Yeah, good. So don't do that. Extractors don't like that stuff. Don't spray oil. Anything that has oil in it. So I definitely am a big proponent of insects at that point throughout flower. And then there's a diluted alcohol mix that you can use as well that evaporates off quickly, or just soap and water if you have like spot stuff that you need to clean up. None of that stuff is gonna. And don't use soap that has oil in it. I know that seems like kind of a silly thing to say, but even like Dr. Bonner's soap has peppermint oil in it. So again, if oil's in the soap and you spray the soap on the plants, then it's going to absorb into the bud, and then they're going to extract it, and you're going to get yelled at again. So don't do that. Just to account for if you use Bonner's soap or a different type of organic soap that has oils mixed into it. Like I think Bonner's has peppermint, and maybe lavender. Can't remember now. I think there's 2 of them in just the classic one.
Yeah.
But anyway, you can account for that in your mix. I usually go like somewhere around 20 milliliters per gallon of total oil, regardless of how you mix it together. So if you do 5, 5, and 5, and 5, or you do 10 and 5 and 5, or however you mix it up, and then usually about maybe a quarter cup of soap per gallon of water. And that's pretty much the same kind of mix that Kapow is, except for it's primarily lemongrass oil, I think, right? Lemongrass and
castor oil.
Castor, that's right.
Yeah.
So
you can anesthetize your fish with castor oil. If you put too much Kapow in your system, you'll put your fish to sleep. They won't kill them, but it'll anesthetize them.
I wish I'd have known that before when I first got my catfish in. They wouldn't stop fighting, like just probably like a week straight. Was just like you go out in there and you just hear them going at it, like smacking the side of the tank and each other, and just they were not happy about their move. So I'd put them to sleep and like, you guys calm down.
You put like a drop of back in the day. I don't know if they still do this anymore, but used to have like puffer fish or trigger fish or other big saltwater fish and stuff like that, and they get their teeth would get too big, so you'd have to wear them down, and we would anesthetize them with clover oil, and you can basically knock them out and put a little tube in their mouth to run water over their gills, and then you can work on them if you have to. We had to work on a couple of expensive groupers in koi that way, where the koi had something that had to get cut out of it or cut off of it, or it got impacted or whatever. It's an old trick for it. So
I would have knocked him out. I got tired of hearing him fighting, so that's good. Next time they get rowdy, I'll call them.
Drop the temperature a little bit. That'll slow them down a little bit too.
Yeah.
So you were talking about extractors. You're in Oregon, so you guys are having quite the debacle with your extraction laws at the moment. What was it, March 1st? They banned removed the sale of all concentrates or extracts from the market. I forget.
There's a number of complications, but yes, that's mostly it. Now, dispensaries can sell whatever they already have on hand. So it's not that you can't buy.
They can't produce anymore.
The dispensary can't buy anymore from anybody who's not licensed, and nobody has any licenses.
Yeah, the licenses is April 1st,
right? Well, it is now. It was supposed to have already been done.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So there's this period where, like there's been people that have applied for rec licenses for extractor licenses for a long time. It's been open to apply for, and the schedule showed them handing out licenses before this restriction came up. So the way they planned it is not the way at least the way they said they planned it is not the way that it happened. People were supposed to have licenses by now, and nobody has any. There's been none issued, zero at all. So right now, there's nobody legally making oil in Oregon. If you're making oil today, as of today, doesn't matter who you are, or how professional you are, or how much equipment you have, or how much anything, you're illegal. There's not one legal one.
It's a Class B felony right now in Oregon.
Right, and so there's obviously a healthy number of extractors. There's a huge demand already. So I guess it kind of depends on who you talk to, whether you think it's a legitimate fuck up, or if it's basically a conspiracy to create a demand in a market that didn't really have a demand. A lot of people feel like that the dispensaries were well stocked by the medical people that were already producing oil, and didn't really leave any room in the market for new recreational stuff producers coming in. So by literally shutting down every one of them, now they have complete control over who does get any sort of demand on the market, who can legally make oil and sell it to dispensaries. And even dispensaries here have gotten letters that say you can't purchase any oil. So it's not like they don't know about the situation. They're well aware of it, had plenty of time to draft a letter and send it out, but they didn't have enough time to draft any recreational licenses. And and send them out. And it's the same situation with recreational grower licenses. I talked to you about the guy that I'm working with right now has an old dairy farm that wants to convert it over into a commercial rec farm. It's a family-owned farm. They've owned it forever, got all the water rights, all the land use rights. They're zoned properly. Like everything's been done, turned in since day one. Like 2 months ago, along with like something like 75 to 80 other applications that just simply haven't been processed. So there's no legal recreational grower either. On top of that, there also are individual counties, like the county I live in right now, Jackson County, is imposing its own regulations in order to try and limit the amount that you can grow on residential and urban residential. So again, depending on your point of view, it's either sort of an overlap of legislation, because our last legislation that went through on statewide essentially said that cannabis was now a farm use crop, whether it's medical grown or whatever it is, medical or recreational is considered farm use. So now what that does is, by defining that in legal terms and saying that it is farm use and it is specifically medical and specifically recreational, it says right in the legislation that those are farm use. The intention of that legislation on the state level is different than the way that the county is interpreting it. And what the county is doing is saying, oh great, you classified this as farm use. Now all of our regulations that we can apply to farm use will also apply to cannabis. So that's kind of the big deal, because in Measure 91, which is what legalized recreational in Oregon, specifically says in it, and was voted in by voters, that says you get no authority over the medical marijuana program. You can't change it or regulate it at all. Even specifically says cities and counties are not able to add regulations in addition to what the OHA has already regulated. And that was supposed to be the way that medical was protected in the state. And so now it's not. This allows them to regulate around it. To give you an idea, there are plenty of little fruit stands, like you mentioned strawberries, right down the road from me here in an urban residential area is probably an entire 2-acre lot that has nothing but strawberries planted on it and a little stand sitting next to it, and they sell strawberries right there. Now they're not zoned properly. They don't have what they call a permit that you can get to basically be out of compliance. Which doesn't make any sense to me to start with. But essentially what they want everybody to do who is an existing grower can be grandfathered in if you pay their $1,500 fee to be able to process your out of compliance permit. So
is that a one-time or a yearly?
Yearly. So
$1,500 yearly?
Yeah.
That's steep.
And it doesn't apply to any new growers. So if you're not already set up, you can't pay that to be able to continue to do it. So they've been talking about changing it, but a lot of people just feel like it's a way for them to extort $1,500 from every existing grower or shut them down, which I think they're fine with either one of those. I think they're fine with taking your $1,500, or they're fine with shutting us down. And probably leads to the same thing, which is that it allows our Jackson County board members the ability to be able to complain about your neighbor's cannabis grow and have them shut down. But all of this is complaint based. So if nobody complains about the strawberries, which who's going to complain about somebody growing strawberries? Nobody's going to. So they don't get a number of complaints about it. So there's no regulation. All that stuff is all based on complaints. It's not like they're going to drive around and look for people that are out of compliance. But what it will do is allow that good old boy that doesn't want his neighbors to grow pot can decide and say, okay, well, now I'm going to complain about this and cause a bunch of trouble and make sure that you have 100 different hoops to jump through. And that's already been known that there is at least one council member on Jackson County that wants to shut down his neighbor. So it doesn't surprise me at all that that kind of stuff is in there. And they've tried to add other regulations as well, but essentially it comes down to Measure 91 said they couldn't regulate it. Now that it's farm use, they just regulate anything that's farm use like it's cannabis, knowing that nobody's going to complain about anything but cannabis. So nobody's going to complain about the smell of your strawberry plants.
Yeah.
You know, nobody's going to complain about you growing cucumbers in mass amount.
I know who'll complain about the strawberries. The weed grower at the end of the street who's pissed off about all the damn spider mites from the friggin' strawberry grow across the street from his house.
Yeah. He's probably loaded up on the Micron filters and indoors by now.
Right.
But the point is that they know that whatever regulations they're putting on it is going to have nothing to do with strawberries or zucchini or any of those other things that everybody knows are full well being produced and sold right there on the spot.
With horrible pesticides, no less. I'm sure they're using Guardian and.
What do you mean? Guardian is all organic, man.
Actually, speaking of which, there's just two really bigger name dispensaries in Colorado that just got busted for still pushing along Guardian laced products. They all tested positive for ivermectin, which was the active ingredient that was hidden in the Guardian. Guardian had ivermectin in it. For those of you that don't know, if you still haven't found out, Guardian is no longer okay to use. They put ivermectin in it. You don't want to be smoking ivermectin, although it does only have it's like a 2 or 3 week half-life. So by the time you harvest and dry it, assuming you're not an idiot, it would be relatively safe, but you still don't want to be smoking that stuff. There's still residuals and who knows what. So, but anyone
is screwed.
Yep. And if you're, as of beginning of January this year, if you're growing with that in a dispensary, you can get Colorado and Oregon, I know you can get all of your product pulled immediately from the market. You get recalled, you get put in the paper and the news, and it's bad for your business. So don't cut corners because you'll get thrown under the bus quick by everyone else.
Don't use Guardian. That's the
Yep.
short story of it. And I'm sure if you've been paying attention to the PFA group or any of those other ones like Steve and I have, you'll see plenty of discussion around it when it first came out and ever since then. And all I can say is I really feel for any of those large growers that, purchased the product and sprayed it on, that worked so hard on every other level to make sure that they had a clean product for a lot of times sick patients that can't tolerate anything other than that. When you have a lowered immune system from cancer treatment, it's a much different situation than if you're, had just happened to get a little bit of moldy bud from your buddy that you smoked on the weekend. That's, you might get a sinus infection from it, but a cancer patient, it can kill him. And so.
Especially when you get to concentrates, because then you're concentrating those metabolites and all those byproducts and toxins and everything else.
Right. And those. Well, and again, a lot of those people work really hard to keep that medicine clean. So to have that be something completely out of your control that allows you to have to pull all that stuff, and I just can't even imagine being somebody in that kind of position. It's got to be heartbreaking.
Or worse yet, imagine if you're like a dispensary and they ran, one of these guys that had ivermectin through an extractor, and then the next guy comes through and it just didn't happen to get totally clean, then they test positive for it, then they look bad and they weren't even using it, which has actually happened in Colorado, where they found testable levels where they went and tested plants in the grow, and they were all clean. They didn't have any products in the whole place that had it, but it was from the extraction equipment, and their flower tested clean, the extraction didn't. So that's, that could have just been lazy extraction. I don't know all the details on it, but that has happened. Or someone would at least temporarily have their stuff suspended, and they'll hold your stuff for 120 days in Colorado before they'll release it again for sale, depending on what the active ingredient is. But the Guardian stuff is 120 days.
I don't know if you caught this conversation too in the PFA group about probiotics showing up on some testing.
Yeah. They're doing microbial testing now in a lot of different. Oregon's doing it, and I know that Colorado's. they're trying to get the framework as to what's acceptable and what's not right now. I know Oregon's doing it. I think California is also. I know I read about there's a group in Humboldt, or some group at a Humboldt that's doing some kind of big wider microbe research project, trying to identify, you know, what any particular ones that are unknown. I know they're also doing a lot of work with viruses as well.
Well, I think that the main issue is having them showing up, having probiotics showing up on like mold and mildew.
Oh, for sure.
They're testing for strictly living organisms, and so it's become an issue with certain labs that in their method of testing where you might have completely clean medicine, but it comes back with because they put all of them on the same scale, it comes back as having readings for mold, mildew, pesticide, and/or living organisms. And so finding a way for those labs or figuring out which ones, I guess, do and don't is important. If you grow probiotically, you're going to need to go to a lab that's able to differentiate between your probiotic bacteria that's going to be living in and on and throughout your plant, and between those living organisms and the mold and mildew that you actually do want to test for. Because in Oregon, I don't know how it is in Colorado, but in Oregon, you know, I think we have a 10,000 particle limit. And I know some people that have had tests come back on their probiotic stuff that has at least been close to above, and it can be a tough thing for a dispensary to understand if they're not familiar with probiotics. So if you do grow some stuff probiotically in an aquaponics system and soil and any way that you're growing probiotically, make sure that if you get a test back that shows that it's high on mold or mildew, you know, don't necessarily trust it. Also, you might want to look into a different lab that's able to differentiate better. And I haven't even myself been able to find out why the one particular lab that we're able to use, how specifically they identify it. So when I find out more information, I'll try to pass it along. But just know that you can get a test back that shows you might have mold or mildew on your stuff when really you don't have anything at all other than just beneficial bacteria.
I know when we did our lab testing, the only time we ever flirted anything close to those upper levels is when we were foliar spraying pretty heavily with like worm teas or compost teas, just because you don't always have 100% control of what you're, you know, which one dominates that particular brew. Depending on what, you know, you do always do your best, but, and it's not to say that there was any bad microbes that came up, you know, they were all fine for, you know, E. coli and all the rest. But, you know, you're like you were saying, the total count comes up high, and that spooks people that don't quite understand, you know, the reason. Now, a great example of that would be a product like Serenade, which is Bacillus sabilis. I think it's Bacillus sabilis. That's a probiotic microbe that if you spray it all over your plants is going to go around like Pac-Man and eat all your little mold spores for powdery mildew and anything else and prevent them from taking off, you know. So, and that's really what you want and grow. So it really just depends on, like you were saying, you really need a good lab that is able to differentiate between all those.
Right, and like I said, if I get some answers on how they differentiate between the two rather than just counting the total number of living organisms in the sample, then you know, I'll definitely pass that info along. But right now, I don't know, you know, if it's like a different type of test that they run. It might even require like an actual person to look at it under a microscope and identify some of them. I have the feeling that's probably more of what's happening, that's probably what's happening where they're differentiating between the two. And when they're not differentiating the two, nobody's actually taking the time to look and say, you know, is this mold or mildew, or is it actually some other type of beneficial organism?
Yeah, you need someone that's got a good 200x or better microscope that can actually get it, or 400x rather, microscope that can look at those microbes and really. I actually have a buddy of mine that has one of those, and he's kind of a compost tea nut. That's how he does it. Is he brews it and then he checks his count on his in his tray. If it's not right, he lets it brew longer. If it's too high, he'll cut it down a little and then that's what he does with his target. But and he's been doing it for years that way, and it works. Yeah.
That's cool. Actually, that brings up another thing when you were talking about the teas. I found that when we were brewing our teas for outdoors to go into the soil garden, I used filter paper out of my filter in the aquaponics system on a regular basis to essentially add ready-made bacteria into our, the general tea mix that you'd already have, and found that it would start foaming and producing much faster in an aerated tea, or even in the labs mix, you would start to see the natural aeration over and over. So I think that that's definitely a good thing if you're going to look into start brewing teas, especially the labs and different things like that. If you want to use labs to break down SSTs or, whatever it is that you're doing, if you have filter paper in your system anywhere, a filter of any kind, or even some media, you can always toss that in there as a quick inoculant and really kick your teas off pretty fast. Works well.
Yeah, so one of the other microbes I've actually found lately, there's this product, managed to pick some up at Indo Expo. It's called Mammoth Tea. This is actually a phosphorus chelating, a couple different types of phosphorus chelating microbes, and they're really, really, really awesome. The other microbes I like a lot are, there's a company called Life, and they make a lot of really good nutrient supplements, many of which are fish safe. Not all, but most of them. And I really like their microbes as well. They have a really good blend of microbes and mycos.
Awesome. Yeah, you should send me the link on that Mammoth stuff. I think I also saw it on the PFA a couple of days before that too, and a bunch of people were saying it was really cool. And I saw some at the grow store the other day. I didn't pick any up, but probably gonna pick some up and probably throw it in my worm bin, or maybe even throw it right in the beds. See how it goes.
Yeah, you can put it right in your water and it doesn't harm the fish at all, and it works great.
Awesome.
Really like that stuff.
Nice.
The other stuff that I got sent recently, Shrills sent me a couple of different pesticides that are essential oil based, and we're going to give them a test. I have a small little test system. We're going to check them for fish safeness first, and then we'll see how they do. But I appreciate them sending us some stuff to test, and just wanted to shout out to them.
Yeah, speaking of that, I got a sample here. Actually, it's a greenhouse material. This is from a company called Solera Wrap, and it's essentially, if I can get it down here to where you guys can see it, it's essentially bubble wrap, and it's very thick. Each one of these bubbles is an individual insulation pocket, and then it just has these channels that it slides into, so you can tack this channel up anywhere on your greenhouse or hoop house or whatever you have, and stretch it over the top or make walls out of it, and you can tack right through the middle. There's a large section here that you can either screw through the middle or nail through the middle, or even just set up hooks for it so that you can then roll it up the way it is now. So they're actually going to send me an entire greenhouse with this material so that I can document it on the YouTube channel, and hopefully get them some attention around that. It's extremely tough. It's rated for 3 feet of snow load and 140 mile/hour winds. So it's, I mentioned this to you before too, here in Jackson County, we have specific regulations that you have to meet if you want to have a a greenhouse over 500 square feet. It has to be permitted, and part of that permit process, you have to your greenhouse has to be able to withstand, I think it's 2 feet snow load and 120 mile/hour winds. And this is one of the few materials that I found to be able to do that. Now, my greenhouse is not that big. It's about 10 feet by 40 feet, and I have 2 of those. So we're going to do comparison grows. One's going to be covered in 6 mil plastic, and the other one's going to be covered in a Solera wrap. And so you look for that on the YouTube channel as well. You can kind of check out and see how that goes. These are just the samples that they sent me to measure on my greenhouse, and they're shipping out the entire roll. There'll be big, long 40-foot sheets that will essentially just slide into those rails that I put onto the greenhouse frame. So that was definitely cool of them, and really excited to kind of see how that stuff works out. It has a lot of really good numbers on it for light diffusion. It's still up like somewhere around like 80% transparency, so that's relatively high. For those of you researching greenhouse materials, definitely check them out. And I can't say much about how they work yet because I don't know, but it definitely looks good, and appreciate them sending out the sample and supporting us. So thanks to them.
Very cool. The only other company that I wanted to plug real quick is this is a product I'm using at the moment for my nutrient needs for supplementing the soil layer. It's basically a specifically dual-zoned product made by the gentleman I was telling you about earlier, Vlad Jovanovic. And he owns a company called Atria Aqua Gardens, atriaaquagardens.com, and I just wanted to plug him. Right now, he gave me a whole full run to do to test with his new formula. So I just wanted to plug him, thank him for that.
Awesome.
So did you see the Cannabis Cup got moved out of Colorado after having 80 million?
I think you posted that a couple weeks ago, and it doesn't surprise me, I guess, in a way. You know,
Colorado's ruining such a good opportunity to make so much money. I mean, they have all these different beer festivals, they have the X Games and all this other stuff. We can't, you know, where people are actively trying to kill themselves. Why can't we have a cannabis festival? You know, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense at all. And I mean, unless you are obviously more opposed to cannabis than you are in favor of money.
Right.
That's really what it comes down to. There's
especially when our governor owns a bunch of breweries. Like he's hugely invests in the industry. I think he owns a brewery or a tap room or something. And it's like, well, yeah, it's direct competition with you. That's why you're being a jackass about it. But it was originally supposed to be a 5-day event in Denver. Then they got bumped down to a 3-day event in Pueblo, and then now it's out in California, and they just gave up entirely. And then there is a thing called the Colorado Cup that's going on. I don't know who's putting it on, but there is going to be a small public event. And then there's, for anyone that's coming out to Colorado that was coming out for the Cup, you can always go to Civic Center Park, which is pretty much the capital it is the capital down in Denver. And they have a huge 420 party where you can pull a couple ounces out of your pocket and no one's gonna, they're checking you for weapons, and as long as you don't have a gun on you, you're good to go. But you can have a huge blunt, you can have a bong, whatever, doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think that I just can't believe the amount of money that they're willing to throw away.
I know.
For some like ridiculous principle that their grandpa taught them 30 years ago. It baffles me, especially when like a lot of them are going to be conservatives, right? And what do they preach all the time? They want deregulation. They want the government to not be involved. They want them to be smaller, not bigger, and regulate less. Oh, unless it comes to cannabis, then I want you to put every fucking regulation that you could ever think of and every loophole in front of them and make sure that you smack them the fuck around at the same time because really just their own attitude about it. So it amazes me how fast so many of them, so many conservatives just completely turn into like, now you're all of a sudden in favor of regulation and government handling it, and like how, it just doesn't make any sense. I mean, it does make sense to me. It just makes me sad, I guess, ultimately, is what it comes down to. Like, people that are so stuck in a lie that's so old, maybe we're conditioned that way to a certain extent, to believe a lot of those that have been around for a long time. But I definitely think they need to get over it and realize that, so many things that they complain about will be fixed by just dropping their shitty attitudes. Like I've seen in my own hometown in Northern California, the same sort of attitude, like growers come in big, and, it's been a lot of like Mexican cartels and like all these different people that aren't come in. A lot of times they're like tweakers that trim and, different things like that really do kind of give the industry a bad name. But the reason that part of the industry exists is because it's illegal. If you had the ability for your brother or your sister or your niece or whoever it is that needs a job to be able to go and harvest a product and take care of it and get paid a decent wage for providing a product that's going to be sold locally. And there's really no reason why. The reason that the people are there that you don't want there is because you won't let the people that are there do it, A, legally, B, without an extreme amount of guilt, judgment, and really just unnecessary attitude towards them. If you really just dropped all that stuff, then you would have all the people that you want to benefit from it, benefiting from it, and you wouldn't have those other people in town, those tweakers that are migrant workers that are coming in and out of town and all that type of stuff. The reason, the cartels, we've already seen that happen in a lot of different places where, like even again in my hometown in Northern California, since medical was legalized years ago there, it allowed at least some people to get a foothold against them. And a lot of the cartels have started to start producing back down in other areas now, or going farther out. And I think any way we drive them out is really beneficial. And that's why I think they become extremely short-sighted in their perspective on trying to regulate out, and like what Jackson County is doing right now here locally. They've essentially shut down every small grower that's on residential or urban residential land. Right now, you're either shut down or you're extorted for $1,500. Those are your options. So I definitely think by doing that, you're just making room for the people that you don't want to do it come in and do it. It's really similar to the logging industry also. Like here, I grew up in a logging community, and we had a lot of very respectful loggers, a lot of people that planted 6 trees for every one that they took out and made sure that they were left with stuff that would regrow. The whole point was to thin out the forest, allow it to be healthy, treat it like a crop, make a profit on it, but do it in a responsible way. And then you had very large corporations doing large clear cuts that would come in and just wipe out and rape whatever land that they could get their hands on. And when those people were shut down, when they went after the logging industry the way they did in the early 90s, it did just the opposite of what they wanted. Every small responsible logger was shut down, and the only ones that were left logging were the ones that had made huge profits off of irresponsible logging. So now you just took out everybody who was doing it right, left the ones that were doing it wrong, and sent all of that business off overseas, where we buy so much lumber from Canada and from Japan and different places now that are not practicing the same types of regulation that we want. They're seeing the same pattern here with cannabis, and that you're going to shut down the people that are doing it right, so that the people can come in from out of state with large corporate interests that are going to come in and be able to take advantage of the vacuum that they created through legislation. And I really hope that a lot of, like, you have a lot of places that are fighting it, like Right to Grow Southern Oregon. Check out our Facebook group. There's a lady named Sandy Diesel, who, and Scotty Diesel, both of them, I should give them both tons of credit, that have organized, that have gotten protests put in place at the different meetings, attended all the meetings. They have attorneys that they have met with that are preparing class action lawsuits against Jackson County for misinterpreting the state legislation about extractors and about grows. So there's a lot of great stuff that's happening that you can get involved with and should get involved with, so that we can try and save the people that are already doing it responsibly. And I'm all for shutting down the ones that do it irresponsibly. I don't have an issue with that, but that's not what's happening here. It's not what happened back then, and I hate to see history repeat itself. So if you're in the area, or if you just want to get involved, like I said, check out Right to Grow Southern Oregon Facebook page. There's also a Right to Grow Oregon page. So any of those types of movements you can get involved in, and also any type of legislation you have in your local area at all about cannabis, get involved and make your opinion known, because even when your opinion is known, it's going to be tough for them to deal with, but they still need to hear it. They need to hear it often. And unless you're there and saying it often, then they're not even going to listen to it or account for it. So be heard.
Definitely. A lot of, and take the time to write your congressman, send them those links. Colorado, Oregon, Washington, California. There's so many good news stories now of children and families and all kinds of people that have been helped so much, especially people with seizure disorders and cancer and other, really debilitating diseases.
You can watch it on camera. You can watch seizures stop on camera. They take the medicine.
Within just a couple of minutes.
Yeah. So there's plenty of evidence right in their face. That's a great point.
So my sister has a pretty bad seizure disorder. She got mysteriously after a few minutes after getting a really, really heavy dose hospital level flu shot. And she's been having seizures ever since then. And then my cousin also has a seizure disorder. And I'm really happy today because Pennsylvania, my home state where I grew up originally.
Yeah.
My sister and my cousin live. They actually just legalized medical marijuana today. It passed the passed the House and the Senate after a long battle of like eight-year battle, at least trying to get that through. So hopefully by the end of the year, both my relatives will be able to get medicine. It really hits close to home. I know a lot of different people that have had their lives dramatically affected. Myself, I have celiac disease, and before I discovered cannabis oil and cannabis, I was losing so much weight, and even on a restricted diet, you still have some other issues, and taking cannabis oil really and edibles really helps me, especially if I'm cross-contaminated. That it's either I can lay in pain for 3 days and feel like there's a ferret running through my intestines,
right.
Or I can take a bunch of oil and a couple of edibles, and maybe a day I'm going to be in discomfort, but the severity and the impact on my health, my ability to get back to work, and all that stuff is just so much helped by it.
Right. And it's there's so many different applications to that for me personally, I started out with medical because I was in a motorcycle accident when I was a teenager, and my shoulder's been messed up pretty much ever since. Anytime I exert myself, like playing basketball was probably the main one. Loved to play basketball, played all through high school, played all 4 years. So anytime after the accident, I played much basketball at all, my shoulder would get really sore. I get has nerve damage in it, so it get sort of tingly down the side, all the way down my arm, and would really hurt at night trying to sleep. And so one of my old hippie buddies from down in Eureka one time happened to, and this was long before this is probably 14 years ago, something like that. And so salves were not really a big thing other than in, some relatively small circles. And at least I'd never been exposed to them before, and I've been exposed to plenty of weed. So he gave me that stuff, and it was like a little jar of it. And he just said to put some on before I go to sleep. And I just took it from him more just to be nice than anything. I actually didn't even really plan on using it. And it sat on my dresser for a very long time, probably like a month and a half to 2 months, before I was just having a lot of trouble sleeping one night. And I just said, you know what, I'm going to give it a try. It was sitting right there. Didn't have to get up or anything, and rubbed that stuff on. And for the first time in a long time, I slept for like 8 straight hours. And, pretty much ever since then, I was a believer of it for things other than just getting high. It was definitely an understanding that I was raised with for a long time. I didn't even start smoking until just after high school. So for me, I have a different experience than what some other people do. But even after I smoked it for a while, I still didn't understand that it was for, that it could be for much more than just getting high. Not that that's not fun and I don't enjoy it, but it's definitely good for way more than that.
Especially there's so many strains now, you can find something that's dialed in, and every day there's more and more strains specifically designed for different diseases. It really is, there's so much research being done about the different cannabinoids. I know THCV and CBD both have been studied for, and CBN, all three have been studied for epilepsy and seizures. And you really need to look at and research your particular disease and find out which of your cannabinoids or terpenes you need to get you going.
Yeah, there's some great like pie charts and stuff, where it shows the different kinds, like even what the different smell terpenes and all that kind of stuff, what they're used for, and so there's a lot of great links out there if you start looking up that stuff, and you can kind of get an idea of what types of things, what types of strains that you can go for. Like Leaf Fly has some great information, like lists for PTSD or anxiety or different stuff. My wife struggles with anxiety on a regular basis, and so we've researched different strains to help her out and dialed in different stuff so that she was able to get off of Adderall, and so that was definitely another one of those moments where you kind of realize that it's not a medicine, just like a one medicine. It's not like just ibuprofen. It's like a whole cabinet that you can draw from, that you never drew from before. And so for her, this Hercule strain that I showed you guys already, this one that was growing out there, this is the 1-to-1 CBD. Well, it's advertised as 1-to-1, but this particular strain, this particular bud here, we had tested, and it came back the 14, I think it's 14.8 or 14.9 and 19.5 on THC. And it happens to be, just the right mixture for what she needs to be able to treat both her sciatica and her ADHD, anxiety symptoms. So it just happens to be one of the better ones. And we also have Trainwreck, which is growing in the system right now, which is one of the, if you look at Leaf Fly, it's one of the ones that's listed as the higher usage for ADHD and anxiety, PTSD, pretty much any of those psychological treatments.
AP stuff.
Nice. What do you got there?
These are all Bruce Banner. Well, I'll take it back. These two are Bruce Banner.
Nice.
Nice, decent ones. And then this one's a lemon haze. So.
Nice. I have this is from the aquaponic system. This is the Platinum Delight.
Nice.
You see the purples in there. If I can get it to focus good enough, it's all right. And it's just a high THC. It's platinum cookies crossed with blue power, and it's a great tasting strain. It's extremely fruity. Almost tastes like grape Kool-Aid.
Very cool.
I guess the best thing, it's really sweet smelling like that. It's kind of like when you were a kid and you make Kool-Aid by yourself, and there's like that layer of sugar at the bottom. Like that's how syrupy it smells. It's very sweet, very like. And then let's see, we had this is blue cheese.
Nice.
And it was your classic cheese structure, so it definitely
There's another topic we could talk about.
What's that? Oh, that's true.
Cheese debacle.
Oh yeah, now maybe I don't know.
Okay, so there's a company out there called Big Buddha Seeds, and this guy has attempted to copyright the phrase cheese in regards to cannabis trademarks and copyright. So he's sending out these illegal takedown notices that have no, first off, in U.S. court, copyright law and trademark law are federal. There is no state level for either of those. And since cannabis is still federally illegal, you can't put a trademark on something that's federally illegal. You can't trademark cocaine. I can't trademark ecstasy. It's illegal on a federal level. So first off, anyone who sent one in the U.S., that's an illegal notice. Like, you're not allowed to send false legal notices, especially cease and desists. That's actually a crime in a lot of states. And then he's doing the same thing over in Europe. Again, in Europe, you have to back it up with a genetic lineage and prove that you developed the strain. Cheese has been around for at least 12 years that I have been around, and I'm sure it's been longer than that because I haven't been around the block anywhere near as long as, you know, a lot of the people that are 2 or 3 times my age. So for this guy to come out of nowhere and try and claim that he owns the right to cheese and cheese genetics is just total bullshit. And he has no legal standing for it. Neither is it any kind of defensible in court. So for him to go out and make these claims and send these illegal takedown notices is just ridiculous.
Plus, it's in the name. It's called UK cheese, and the dude is not from the UK. You know what I mean?
Exactly. The guy that originally developed it was based out of the UK. Just like you were saying. So, and the Big Buddha cheese, or Big Buddha seeds, I think is based out of the Netherlands, if memory serves me right. Someone can double check me on that. But I know that you know, that's a huge controversy because it's bad enough when you have big pharma and all these other jackasses trying to patent and copyright individual terpenes and chemical compounds, which again is illegal because it's just in a plant. If it's all over the world, you can't. Now, if you can find a way to extract it, then yeah, you could do that. But you know, you can't just patent something just because it's in a plant, like cannabidiol or THC. Like, you can't do that.
Right. Which is, you know, he's basically just trying to patent the name cheese is what it comes down to. And so, well, obviously, that's not what's actually in the plant. So I understand that it's a gray area. But at the same time, like, what are you thinking, man? Like,
yeah, seriously, you're going to get such a giant target on your head. And no one's going to buy anything from you just because you're basically going to war with the entire, like, smaller grower market. Who the hell's going to support you?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, you already look at IC the 420.com forums, every group that I've been in, the PFA group, the PFA tester group, you know, just random bud porn Facebook groups that I'm a member of. Every one of them has had that dude's face on it that says, "Don't buy any of his shit."
Yep.
Like, really, just a super bad move. Like,
yeah, I've seen at least 80 posts, like just like you were saying, all over the internet with his face and the company logo saying, "Do not support this asshole." And it's just,
you couldn't find like an active weed growers forum anywhere that doesn't have this guy's face on it that says, "Stay the fuck away, don't buy any of it."
Sure.
So, I don't know. I don't know how it's going to end up. And the issue is that he's already got it. He's already got the stuff. Like, they've already
granted it to him, which is, well, first off, the fact that the patent off or a copyright office granted it to him was bullshit. But second off, like, now he has to defend it in court. And the moment that he goes up against anybody else that has money, they're going to school him.
Right. And in between then, he's going to lose the business that he has because nobody wants to buy from somebody that tried to steal even if just the name. It ain't yours, man. Don't take it.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't care if it is a smart idea to trademark it or you thought you were going to make millions of dollars or whatever. Like, you're still a douchebag.
Right? Have you seen, there's a guy, I think he's in Denver. I could be wrong on that part. But I know that I think the company he owns is based in Denver. And they do isolated terpenes. I think it's Blue River extracts or something. But they're low enough in THCA to where they're technically federally shippable across state lines.
Right.
That's always questionable depending on the chemist.
Well, but, there's no chemist sorting at the post office, so.
Yeah, I mean, you get a vial with a powder in it.
You're asking for trouble no matter what, I think. I mean, at least in the ass, like, you know, nobody wants 8-week shipping times, you know what I mean? Like, even if it's going to get pulled and flagged because nobody's going to know the difference between CBD oil and THC oil. Even you and I couldn't tell the difference just looking at it without equipment.
Yeah, or at least tying a little bit of it. I'm hoping that it'll start to be available like in dispos because I've heard some pretty awesome things about its medical applicability. And the guy that invented it, like, invented the specific extraction method, but he's been like pretty cool about. I guess he's not keeping a total monopoly on, like, he has the patents on him or whatever, but he's I saw an interview with him and he seemed like he was pretty pretty cool about trying to like bring that production more into the market, because it has a lot of its own medical values that are totally different than the cannabinoids that we've all been studying for so long. You know, what was it? There was only like two or three of the terpenes weren't even named until like super recently. Anyway, there was one named last year or whatever.
There's like 9 or something like that, right? Isn't there? I can't. I mean, there is.
There's 8 that. There's 8 that I've seen listed that I think can be isolated, or that they've managed to like isolate enough to figure out what they are. But there could be more.
I know on the list for when you get the on the lab that we work with now, you can choose to test for terpenes, and there's at least 8 or 9 of them listed there that you can get results for. So, you know.
But I was bringing that up because it's cool to see someone like him who's kind of doing the opposite of like the Buddha cheese guy.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like and not trying to just be a huge dick. And it was just it was funny to see both of those topics come up, like one right after another this past couple weeks, and seeing how you know, all of a sudden seeing a lot about those terpenes, you know, after having, you know, at least the isolated ones weren't available here up until super recent.
Well, have you read about the recent studies on the entourage effects also? Whether essentially it's the effect of the synergy of the cannabinoids. Yeah, multiple cannabinoids working better together than separately. So, the concept is that even CBD is better off delivered with THC. It's more effective in the stuff that CBD does, and vice versa. THC is more effective when CBD is present for the stuff that THC does. So it's the same thing. Basically, the more that are there, the better, and that's kind of the same thing about the terpenes. So that's why you had a lot of different old timers that have been preaching about that for a while, like, you know, the Jack Herer. You know, he preached about terpene profiles, you know, for years and years now. So it's neat to see some of those older concepts that have been proven really in a number of different areas. I know that guy did a whole lot. I've read a lot of different information about the stuff that he did with, you know, genetics and how the Jack Herer strain sort of like was his culmination of that, and how many people have been like saying that they haven't and don't. And so it's really an interesting strain story, I guess, if you want to read through one of them. It's almost like Chernobyl is a really interesting strain story, where it's basically just a bag seed. Nobody really knows what the hell it is. So it was just one of those things. Somebody decided to pop a seed and happened to turn out really well and didn't hermaphrodite, and cut's been around ever since. So there's a few different strain stories like that are pretty cool. Who knows which ones are true and which ones aren't, but obviously the Jack Herer one is pretty well documented. The guy has a pretty large amount of work that you can go through and check out if you really want to get into it. And I highly recommend it if that's the kind of thing you're interested in. He was probably, you know, again, one of the real old timers that was preaching about terpene profiles way before it was cool, or named for that matter.
The other thing I saw that happened the last day or two is Florida's considering finally allowing a medical, full plant medical for terminally ill patients, which is the start for Florida, considering how awful their last couple of bills have been, and the whole Charlotte's Web only bill, which was completely bullshit, and all that stuff. And then Humboldt, there's a distillery in Humboldt that's now making a cannabis-infused vodka they somehow managed to get licensed in California, which is kind of insane.
Yeah, half of my family is from Humboldt, just south of Eureka, a little place called Garberville. And, you know, it's right in the heart of the Emerald Triangle. And so if you've ever been in that area, you would know, you know, sort of the saying, only in Humboldt as it goes. That's really probably the only place that you can get a place like that licensed. It's only in Humboldt. That's pretty much it. It'd be really tough anywhere else, but it doesn't surprise me a bit that it's in Humboldt. It's really a different environment there. Have you ever been to that area there on the North Coast, like Humboldt, Trinity, Mendo?
I haven't had a chance to cruise through there yet. I've been to Southern California, but I haven't had a chance to check out Northern Cali yet.
Yeah, it's really plays by its own rules. You know, it's like you're even back when it was, you know, really super duper illegal and still everybody grew. It was basically, you know, there was no medical, there was no nothing. And even then, you know, people used to say you think they were joking, but the real concern with the police was getting pulled over with shitty weed. If they couldn't confiscate your weed that was decent and be able to take it and smoke it or sell it, then that was when you got busted. You were more likely to get busted with, like, you know, an ounce of shake or a bag of trim in the back, or and with nothing for them to take and confiscate and let you go with a warning. That was really the issue. So my brother at numerous times just almost always had, like, you know, an ounce of really good weed stashed somewhere in his car, so that if he got pulled over, he would allow them to confiscate it very graciously and then be able to drive on his way. So those are the kind of rules you play by in Humboldt. It's a different world.
I used to allegedly do something similar when I was traveling a lot in Canada. Yeah, they tend to enjoy their smoke quite a bit as well.
Yeah, so there's plenty of stories around that. That's good fun. It's a great area if you can ever visit there. If you really want to sort of hit up the hardcore sort of Emerald Triangle scene, there's always Reggae on the River, is a huge reggae event. Happens every year, and just basically just a giant festival in the Redwoods. It's pretty much as hippie as you can get, I suppose. And you get all kinds there. But it's a beautiful place to live, visit, and best weed in the world, as far as I'm concerned. Other than aquaponic weed, of course.
Yeah, and that's something else, you know, aquaponic weed, especially if you finish it off right with a little bit of sweeteners right at the end. At least I found, especially in the dual root zone, you know, the last four to 6 weeks, they'll start watering in molasses. Man, you get such a good tasting bud, and you can let them fish feed right at, you know, stop feeding with fertilizer the last 4 weeks, just like you would flush normally, but in a dual root zone anyway. And then just, you know, keep giving them the micro boosts into the soil, and then, you know, just give them system water and let them get fish feed all the way to the end, and you'll end up with just the best tasting stuff. You know, it'll get real heavyweight, especially right at the end, as long as you have it done right. The last week or two, it really bulks, and the AP especially.
Yeah, I've found that every strain that I've grown in aquaponics has turned out like sweeter or more vibrant. Like the cheese smells more like cheese than it does in soil. And you know, the lemon OG that I grew that same cut both in soil and in aquaponics, and even in the real basic firstum I did first off. It was just the amount of crystallization on the buds was higher in aquaponics. The smell was more potent and sweeter or more vibrant. That's really the best way that I can explain it, because, you know, the lemon OG was more of a pungent smell than it was sweet, but it still had, you know, a sweeter element as opposed to like a chemical smell to it. So more like a lemon drop than a lemon cleaner, you know, is kind of the comparison that I would make to that. So for whatever reason behind it, and I don't add any sugar, I don't add any molasses. I did, I think, maybe twice total in my second run, and that was the only time that I put anything in. And again, it just seemed like more work for not much benefit in my particular area. So I stopped doing that altogether too. I didn't flush at all. I maintained the whole thing all the way through to the end. And basically, when I hit about 40 to 50% amber trichomes, that's when I cut down. I did have the mango pretty much finished on its own. Like, even though it was just, you know, obviously still had nutrients available to it, it did shut down in the same way that a plant would shut down. I mean, it knew it was time, and started dropping shade leaves and, yellowing out, and sort of doing, the buds were hardening up, and it ambered way sooner than the other plants did. It was the first one that I cut down. So all those signals that, for whatever reason, that mango kush got its signal and triggered to be able to do that. But like the Platinum Delight and the other ones, honestly, if I wasn't having issues with like caterpillars were starting to show up at different points in the soil garden out back, and I didn't want them to start migrating in, and dealing with that. And it was getting really late in the year. I didn't cut down, I think, till like the first week of November, and they were still hardening up and still getting bigger. And so, I know that's, again, that's this bud right here that was already extremely hard and dense, but it probably could even win another week. And so turned out amazing, sweet. I don't flush, I don't do any of that, and it still comes out, in my opinion, sweeter and better than,
oh yeah, for sure.
Ever gotten.
If you're just using AP water, you don't need to flush because you don't have any chemical anything to worry. There's nothing to flush out of the plant that was a problem to begin with, that, and you can feed all the way to right at the end, which is so nice.
Right. And so, and then in my first grow, I had actually cut back on fish feed to try and help the nitrogen stay down lower in the system before I started doing the cover cropping. But now that I do the cover or companion cropping, whatever you want to call it, and I put the other greens in there, I don't even cut back on fish food. It's just all the same all the way through. And that's what I did on that outdoor system, and what I'm doing indoors right now. And everything's going really well. So I've been really happy with it. I've had a couple of different people that I know are trying it based after seeing, grows like ours on there, which is really cool. When I get messages from some of those people out of the Facebook group and stuff, they send me pictures of their plants, and it's really neat to see. Like I think somebody posted one on the comment the other day. He had just a little one in the top of his fish tank. And I love that stuff. That stuff is so awesome. And I know that he knows that it's going to outgrow that,
Oh yeah, the aqua farm. There's a guy that had his 6. It was some guy in Colorado, and he had his 6 plants in the top of an aqua farm in like Rockwell. It was hysterical.
So and so it takes all kinds. Obviously, you get people to understand that it's going to outgrow that system, and they're just experimenting with it. And that's cool and awesome. And then sometimes you get the people that are like, check out this super awesome system that I built. It's, it's way awesome. You can learn from it. And it's like a, PVC with holes drilled in the top of it, and their plants are like this tall and buds all swaggy. And it's like, oh yeah, great. There's definitely that element to it. But the ones that are just like, I'm glad that I had somebody that documented this and said, like, you can do it if you just do a couple of things. That just somebody that was saying positive things about growing it, because I'm sure you ran into the same thing I did, which was cannabis growers. No way, don't do it. Aquaponics growers talking about cannabis. No way, don't do it. Both were extremely, whichever one you talk to, were both extremely opposed to doing it. And so it probably set me back like probably a solid year of not doing it, just because people were so negative about it before. I started getting, again, it was the tomatoes for me personally. Like once I had a tomato that was like this big around, or I had a cherry tomato plant that had one fruit trellis that had like 32 tomatoes on it, I was like, come on, if I can do that, obviously I can at least grow some decent weed for myself to smoke and not really have it cost me that much money. So yeah, and it's definitely done that for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit cheaper too. You don't have to. I know even I've fertilized a lot heavier than you do, and it's still costing me about 35% of what I was doing before when I was just doing soil or hydro in terms of nutrients. So
yeah, I think I calculated my outdoor grow cost me about $20. So basically, that's just for fish food and power for the pump and power for the aerator, and the fish food for the entire grow, and everything else was just waste from my house, just fruit scraps, banana peels, apple cores.
You use iron a little bit though, right?
What's that?
use iron though, right?
No, I don't. I use well water, so it has a
Oh,
lot.
so okay. Well,
Yeah,
that's cheating.
that's not cheating,
Yeah.
and it's actually the
Starting
only
off with a high
water.
ppm level in your tap water.
Yeah, I
Going
don't
off
do
the dose.
chlorine. I don't mess with, you guys have it way harder. I understand. But you also have to understand, too, that it's literally the only positive thing that you get out of having hard water. Everything else about having hard water sucks other than your garden. It ruins your plumbing. Like if you don't want it to ruin your plumbing, you have to put a really expensive water softener in. Like it, like it ruins your appliances. Your fridge will last half as long if you've got like a little water dispenser in it. You have to replace the filter twice as often. Your water heater will get calcified and blow up. It's like twice as fast, not literally blow up, but stop heating water, which is sort of what it's supposed to do. So there's a ton of negative things about having it. But if you have well water or groundwater, aquaponics is an awesome solution for you because you don't have to supplement that much stuff, especially your macronutrients, which can be a little bit more difficult to manage. Like iron, for instance, like you were just talking about, is you can put insulated iron. Obviously, a lot of people are doing that, but I don't have to do that. And if you're on well water or groundwater, odds are you probably won't have to do it that much either. Still, obviously, read your plants and put in stuff that you need. But for me personally, between the worm bin and the well water, I pretty much can solve any issues that way. So yes, it is cheating a little bit, I'll admit it, but it's the only way that I get to cheat, and it makes up for all the other crap I have to deal with from hard water.
I have pretty hard water too, but I end up having a dose, or I end up with a lot of calcium, but we don't have hardly. It's all granite. It's like dolomite rock.
Right.
So we don't have hardly any iron, but we have lots of. I have really good calcium base. And I'm halfway there with my calcium and my water, so that works. But
which is probably great for your pH buffer. Probably once you get it to where you're pretty stable.
It's high in pH, so when I'm topping them off, it works out real well for at least helping to maintain it. The issue is you don't always want to do that because, especially in flower, you're wanting to dose your pH up to add more calcium or add more potassium. At least in the way that I use it. So, right. It's not. You don't always want total stability.
Where you keep your pH at most of the time?
Most of the time, I'm using potassium bicarbonate or calcium carbonate. Once in a blue moon, I'll use potassium silica if I need to, that's the other one that I use. And then that's mostly what I use for pH up, is those three.
Cool. Yeah, mine's high in pH as well. It usually runs about 8 out of the tap, so it's end up having to deal with that. And then I just use pH down and very like a cap full basically in the sump tank. Let it sort of take about 20 minutes for it to really get through the system. And then I test it again, and usually at least 20-30 minutes between dosing and get it down to where I want it to go. But like you were saying, if I just top off the tanks, I do that pretty regularly, like once every 3 to 5 days, then it'll just regulate itself, and I don't have to adjust it at all. But if for whatever reason you have to do a water change, or you get a leak, or any of those different things that happen to where you have to put in a lot of water, then that's when we start switching over. And then the pH down I use is mostly phosphoric acid. General Hydro, I think, is the one who makes it.
Okay.
And if you look at on the back, it'll say most of the time. I actually looked up the info on their website too, and it's like something like 90% phosphoric acid and a little bit of citric. So try to stay away from the harsher acids like citric, and stick with a little bit softer scale phosphoric acid. And then also, if you're neutralizing phosphoric acid, then some of that's actually going to become available. Not much of it, but some of it will become available. And also, if you have like I have calcium, I think it's bicarbonate, right? That is that's going to be coming out in my well water, which is carbonate. So that will be also being neutralized by the phosphoric acid. That's essentially what is taking out the pH buffer and those two neutralizing each other has a small amount of benefit to it as well. So if you're going to use pH down, I recommend phosphoric acid over any of the other ones.
Yeah, there's a couple of other tricks you can do too. So if you have a really big new system, like and it even works for smaller systems too, but if you have a really large system and you just need to adjust it in the beginning, you know, I have a whole greenhouse size system or something, you can actually use dry ice. The CO2 that gets put off into the water when it boils off into the water creates carbonic acid, which then dissolves the carbonates in the water and helps lower the pH, and then that'll totally pH. And it's the cheapest way. You know, you can adjust a 10 or 20,000 gallon system for 20 or 40 bucks worth of dry ice. You know, it doesn't take a whole lot. You know, you're looking at like a block per 4,000 or 5,000 gallons.
Right. And just to reiterate, that's for
0.4 pH with no fish in it. Yeah.
Right. Don't put dry ice in with your fish and come back and yell at us later. Just to be not with fish. But no, that you're right. That is a great way of very cheaply doing a large system starting out. And obviously before, you know, you don't want to like inoculate it or do any of that other stuff beforehand. You know, just, you know, be wasting your time. But if you fill it up, pH it, inoculate it, cycle it, you know, in that order, that's going to be absolutely your cheapest way to get a large amount of water brought down. So any of you guys looking at large systems, make sure you check into dry ice.
Yeah, it's about a quarter of the cost of phosphoric acid or even muriatic acid to do the. If you look at like cost per gallonage shifted, pH or gallonage dropped, all the different ways. I used to use that for koi ponds. We'd have customers and it's ludicrously high pH, and we kept our water at like 7. And if their tap waters or the ponds at like 8 when I fill it up because they had, you know, a brand new pond, I can't put them in there; it'll kill them. So they'll go through pH shock. So that was the way, you know, cheapest way that we could come up with to do it, and it works well. I mean, usually you might have to add a little pH up, and it'll take about 2 hours to fully boil off. And then you know, just bring it back up to the level you want. Sometimes you can overshoot it, depending on how much you put in there, but it's no big deal because it's a lot easier just to add pH up, and then you know, okay, now I got good calcium or potassium or and whatever else it is that you know, or potassium silicate. If you're going to use that to raise your potassium and silica, which is really good for flour.
Right, and the dry ice is going to be more of an like overall thorough job. Where it might be a little harder to calculate exactly how much phosphoric acid you would need because it's going to depend on whatever buffer level you have in there already. So you might need way more than you think you do, or you might need way less than you think you do. But the way dry ice is quarter of the cost and will wipe out the whole thing, whatever needs to be done. And then, like you said, you can rebuild from there if you need to re-inoculate, cycle, add pH up, or odds are you don't even need to add pH up. You could probably just add some of your existing high pH water to it and start mixing it if you really. I mean, that's how I bring pH up. I don't ever buy pH up or use any sort of pH up because I could probably bottle my water and sell it as pH up. It comes out so high. So I don't ever worry about that. But again, large systems, dry ice is probably going to be your way to go. Even cost comparison is going to be tough to do because if your water has a large pH buffer in it already, it's going to take even more than you think. It's got less, it's going to take less than you think. And so, you know, just make sure you do your homework on that if you're going to use phosphoric acid or any acid really to do a large system.
Sure, and if you're looking to check and see how much your pH buffer that you have is, you can actually go to your pet store and they'll actually have a little test kit called a KH test kit. Sometimes it'll say a KH and GH test kit, and that's what you can use to test, and that'll give you your DKH or your dissolved carbonate hardness, and that'll help you a lot in figuring out how much of a buffer you have to overcome before you can actually shift your pH.
Right, that's a great point. You know, I probably don't test that stuff nearly as often as I should, but that's a great resource for people that, you know, that are just starting out or don't necessarily know that much about testing your own stuff. I know it can be a little intimidating, but it's very easy to do. And if you go down to your pet shop, they'll definitely take the time to explain a lot of that stuff to you. And it's stuff they have to explain to anybody who has fish. It really doesn't, not specific to aquaponics.
Yeah, that's funny. So, yeah. I think Marty and I both agree it's been a real good 2-hour podcast. I thought maybe we'd get to an hour and 15, an hour and a half, and we ended up filling out a whole 2 hours, so that worked out great. We'll hopefully do this again soon, and we'll, if you guys have any questions or topics you'd like for us to cover, we can drop them in the comments, and we'll see you guys hopefully in a week or whenever we can get back together here soon.
All right, sounds good.
And check out Marty's channel. He's got AP Meds on YouTube, and then I'm Potent Ponics on YouTube. And is there anything else that you want to plug or say? Or
no, just thanks for watching, and good luck in Jamaica. Hope it all works out well, and we get to have a podcast from there, and you can make us all jealous.
To invite you guys down at some point, you know.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you guys next time. Have a good one.
All right. Thanks a lot.